Here we go. You've been told the signs of a chosen person are written in the sky, or maybe in ancient books. You've been waiting for a miracle, right? Well, you're waiting in the wrong place. Because the most powerful prophecies, the ones Jesus actually talked about, they aren't outside you. They are happening right now in the most painful, weirdest parts of your life. This isn't about church or religion. This is about power and why you feel so different. I'm talking about the feeling that you don't fit in here, that you see the world's rules as totally fake, that deep anxiety that hits you when you are around too many people. It's not a social disorder. It's a literal spiritual rejection. Jesus didn't just talk about the end times. He talked about the qualities of the people who would stand firm when everything else fell apart. He spoke of a specific kind of person, the one who would be judged, misunderstood, and persecuted, yet still hold on to a strange, burning truth. If you carry that burning truth, if you constantly feel the spiritual static of the world, then the signs are not on a billboard. They are the daily struggles that are turning you into the person you are meant to be. The main problem is that most people think the chosen one is supposed to be easy, that you get a free pass, a golden ticket to happiness. The challenge you face, the central problem, is that your life is actually harder than everyone else's. Let's talk about Sarah. Sarah was, by all accounts, a nice, normal person. She had a job she didn't hate, a small apartment, and a couple of friends. But Sarah carried a secret burden that made her life a constant uphill battle. She felt everything too much, not emotionally, but energetically. When she walked into a room, the negativity, the hidden resentments, the unspoken sadness of every person there didn't just affect her. It hit her like a physical wave, leaving her dizzy and exhausted. This wasn't just being sensitive. It was a literal, spiritual sensitivity that acted like a tuning fork, picking up every dissonant vibration. Her challenge is trying to live a normal life with a spiritual lie detector constantly screaming in her head. When a boss would smile and promise a raise while secretly planning to fire 3 people, Sarah would get a crushing headache and a sudden, violent urge to run. When a friend would offer comfort while silently judging her, Sarah's stomach would clench. This led to the real, immediate problems. Isolation. She couldn't maintain shallow relationships. People thought she was moody, unpredictable, or difficult because she constantly rejected situations that felt spiritually false, even if they looked fine on the surface. She started avoiding social events, not out of shyness, but self-preservation. She became isolated because the energetic cost of being around people was simply too high. Self-doubt. She spent her 20s and early 30s believing she was a problem. Doctors called it generalized anxiety disorder. Therapists suggested grounding techniques. Nobody recognized that her anxiety was a correct, accurate reading of a sick world. She would constantly ask herself, am I too fragile? Why can everyone else handle this? This self-doubt was the enemy's master plan. Convince the powerful one they are weak. The constant test. Every choice for Sarah was a moral and energetic test. Most people can just take a job for the money or smile through a conversation to be polite. Sarah couldn't. Her inner self will rebel physically against any act of compromise or falsehood, forcing her to live a life of uncompromising truth, which in the modern world is incredibly difficult and constantly penalizing. These struggles were not accidents. They were the very signs Jesus spoke of, the persecution for righteousness' sake, the feeling of being not of this world, the wisdom that made her seem foolish to others. Sarah's inability to live a comfortable lie was the first, clearest sign of her divine purpose. The long, grueling process of Sarah moving from self-doubt to understanding her true purpose is where the divine training happens. This phase is characterized by a series of repetitive, painful lessons that force her to accept her unique energetic reality. This is a crucible, the place where the chosen one is forged, not anointed. The first major sign that Sarah wasn't just too sensitive came during a mundane team-building retreat. They were gathered in a dimly lit conference room, and the facilitator was having them do a forced trust exercise. The atmosphere was thick with fake sincerity. Sarah felt the usual headache starting, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a physical reaction. She saw a fleeting, almost transparent visual anomaly around one of her colleagues, a man named Tom who was smiling brightly and talking about synergy. Sarah briefly saw a dark, oily, shimmering shape attach his back, like a dense, smoky cloak. It vanished as soon as she blinked, but the feeling it left behind was one of absolute, suffocating deceit. Tom was, in fact, secretly embezzling from the company and planning to blame another co-worker. Sarah didn't know the facts, but she knew the energy. This was the first time her spiritual gift manifested visually, confirming that what she felt wasn't just emotion, it was sight. This event did not solve her problems. It amplified them. Now she knew she was seeing literal darkness. The world suddenly became a minefield of illusions. She couldn't look at a politician on TV without seeing the greedy, hungry energy wrapped around them. She couldn't shop without feeling the pain of the laborers who made the cheap goods. Her sensitivity became a curse, pushing her deeper into isolation. She quit her job soon after. The mental and spiritual effort required to pretend the darkness wasn't there was costing her too much. She took a small, part-time job working alone in a local library archive, a quiet, dusty place filled with old books, where the main energy was on of static, forgotten knowledge, which was, paradoxically, less taxing than the high-frequency chaos of the modern office. The library became her sanctuary and, unknowingly, her training ground. This is the second crucial sign, the desert. In the Bible, Moses, Elijah, and Jesus all spent time in the wilderness or the desert before their purpose was fully realized. They were separated from the noise of the world. Sarah's desert was the solitude of the archives. She spent endless hours cataloging brittle paper, surrounded by silence. In this silence, the external noise finally faded enough for her to hear her own frequency. She started experimenting with her energy field. She would sit cross-legged in the most neglected corner of the archive, where the light barely reached, and deliberately try to tune out the low, sad energy of the dusty books and the cold air. She discovered she had a boundary. She wasn't just a sponge. She was a regulator. When she intentionally focused her mind, the aggressive energies that had always assaulted her would hit a subtle, invisible barrier and deflect. But this took incredible, exhausting effort. The key breakthrough came when she stopped focusing on defending and started focusing on radiating. Instead of pushing the dark energy away, she would focus on generating her own pure, undeniable light, the spiritual truth she carried. The moment she stopped trying to hide the truth of her purpose and started trying to express it, everything shifted. This is a third sign, the one Jesus constantly repeated. The light must not be hidden. The work was brutal. Every morning, she would spend 2 hours intentionally projecting pure, peaceful energy into the air. At first, it felt like trying to push a giant, immovable object. The darkness resisted, throwing waves of nausea and doubt back at her. Who are you to do this? You are nobody. You are just a clerk. She fought these thoughts not with logic, but with pure, simple spiritual intention. She would ground her feet on the floor and tell herself, over and over, one simple sentence: I am here and my truth is true. Slowly, the atmosphere in the archive changed. The librarian, a stern, perpetually unhappy woman named Mrs. Peterson, started becoming softer. One day, Mrs. Peterson brought Sarah a piece of homemade cake, something she had never done for any employee in 20 years. It's just that the air feels lighter in here lately, Mrs. Peterson mumbled, avoiding eye contact. It smells less like dust and more like fresh air. Sarah knew it wasn't the air. It was a sustained, focused effort of her silent spiritual work. She wasn't fighting the dark. She was simply outshining it. The next level of her training involved people. She couldn't stay isolated forever. Her purpose was clearly to be a beacon. She started attending local gatherings, farmers markets, small community events. Not to socialize, but to practice her shielding and projection skills in a live environment. It was like spiritual martial arts. The chaotic energy of the crowd would rush at her, and she would simply hold her internal, radiating truth. She discovered that her internal frequency was strong and steady enough. The aggressive energies of others wouldn't just deflect. They would subtly change. People standing near her would visibly relax. Arguments would dissolve. Children would instinctively drift toward her. This led to the most direct, personal sign of her divine purpose, the test of the accusation. Jesus was constantly accused, not of bad actions, but of disrupting the established order, of being friends with sinners or breaking traditions. Sarah's test came in the form of a minor local scandal. A valuable historical document went missing from the archive. The police were called. Because Sarah was the last person to handle the document and had the strangest working hours, she was immediately the prime suspect. Director Thorne, the same stressed-out functionary from the previous story who had now moved into the sector, was called in for the investigation. He recognized Sarah instantly, and his old, deep-seated resentment flared. He saw an opportunity to finally validate his dismissiveness of her weirdness. The police interrogation was brutal. They used standard pressure tactics, but for Sarah, it was a total energetic assault. They focused not just on the facts, but on undermining her reality, trying to force a confession. They brought up her history of anxiety and her unusual lifestyle, trying to paint her as unstable and therefore guilty. But Sarah was no longer the fragile person who felt everything too much. She was the one forged in the spiritual desert. She sat across the table, maintaining her internal, radiant truth. She didn't argue or get defensive. She simply spoke with calm, undeniable honesty. She projected an energetic field of pure, transparent truth. The detectives, who were masters of reading human lies, found her impossible to break. Every lie they tried to bait her with, every trap they set, she met with a simple, solid, radiating truth that short-circuited their tactics. The man in charge of the interrogation, a cynical detective named Miller, felt his usual anger and suspicion draining away, replaced by a profound, uncomfortable sense of peace that he hadn't experienced in years. He finally snapped his notepad shut, not because he believed she was innocent based on evidence, but because he couldn't stand the pressure of her truth anymore. He had never experienced such pure, unshakable sincerity. The accusation had tested her, and her spiritual truth had broken the test. The document was found a week later. A clumsy intern had misfiled it. Sarah was formally cleared, but the real consequence was internal. She had passed the test of spiritual endurance. She was ready. The recognition came, not with a public decree, but with a sudden, global realization of a threat Sarah had been anticipating for years. The great spiritual drought. The world, having been subtly stabilized by Sarah's unacknowledged work, suddenly stopped producing the basic energetic fuel that human civilization runs on: hope, empathy, and collective coherence. People didn't just become depressed. They became spiritually empty. It was a crisis of meaning, manifesting as a complete societal shutdown. Violence spiked. Creativity flatlined. People simply stopped caring about anything. The governments and scientists were paralyzed. They could measure the economic damage, but they couldn't find the cause. They were looking for a terrorist, a virus, or a meteor, but the cause was a total spiritual flatline. Director Thorne, now head of a multi-agency crisis task force, was losing his mind. He was staring at charts showing the collapse of human motivation and the total failure of all psychological interventions. He finally slammed his hand on the table and yelled, "We need someone who understands the non-physical cause. Bring me that archive woman, the one who talked about frequencies." This was the moment. The world, broken and desperate, finally called for the one it had dismissed. The recognition wasn't a coronation. It was a desperate plea for help from people who had run out of all other options. A military transport arrived at Sarah's quiet library. She was sitting there, calmly sipping tea, having known they were coming. She had been preparing her entire life for the moment the world's false logic failed. They rushed her to the Global Crisis Center, a sterile, concrete bunker filled with panic leaders and flashing screens. Thorne led her straight to the central operations table, displaying a map of the world that was darkening, indicating the spiritual collapse. "Sarah," Thorne gasped, his voice broken, "you said the problem was resonance. What is it? What do we do?" Sarah looked at the desperate faces, the generals, the politicians, the scientists. She didn't feel triumph. She felt immense, quiet compassion. She walked to the center of the room. She didn't need a screen or a console. She closed her eyes. "You're trying to fix the result," she said, her voice soft but echoing in the silence. "The drought is a result of collective fear and a total lack of internal truth. The planet's heart is beating too fast, too shallowly. We need to slow the rhythm and fill the void with genuine coherence." She explained her divine purpose, not with mystical language, but with simple, undeniable spiritual physics. She needed to anchor a new, coherent frequency to the world's consciousness, and she needed the world to consent. Her climax wasn't a physical act, but an act of pure, spiritual leadership and focus. She stood in the middle of the bunker, surrounded by the world's most powerful people, and began to radiate. She projected the purest, most stable energy she had ever generated. The simple, unwavering truth. You are safe. You are loved. You are real. She had them shut off the screens, the loud phones, the constant noise. She had them all sit in silence, and she simply held the space. Her light, the silent, invisible fire she had stoked in the archive for years, filled the room. This time, the effect was not deflected. It was absorbed by the high-ranking leaders. They didn't see light or fire, but they felt the profound, overwhelming peace. Their racing minds slowed. Their chest tightness dissolved. For the first time in months, they felt hope. Director Thorne opened his eyes, tears streaming down his face, not from sadness, but from the sudden, impossible relief. He looked at Sarah, the woman he had dismissed, and whispered, "It stopped. The panic, it's gone." This was the recognition. Not that she was a prophet, but that her power was real, and it was the only thing that worked. The signs Jesus spoke of aren't the dramatic weather patterns or the political turmoil. They are the internal conditions that prepare the chosen to be the anchor when the storm hits. The signs are the persecution, your constant feeling of being judged, misunderstood, or too much. The desert, the isolation and loneliness that force you into quiet, uncompromising self-work. The unbreakable truth, the inability to compromise on your spiritual integrity, even when it costs you everything. Sarah's story shows that the divine purpose isn't waiting for you in a field of flowers. It's waiting for you inside the most painful, difficult parts of your life. The discomfort you feel is the power you carry. Try and find a way out. Stop waiting for the sign outside. Look at your life. The evidence is overwhelming. Subscribe if you want to understand more about the unseen power working inside your life.